Our text for this morning comes to us out of Matthew's Gospel, the 3 verses, very familiar. Chapter 4, verses 23 through 25. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. If I were to ask you this morning a very important question, how would you answer it? Do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in Jesus? Of course, many of you would say, maybe, I believe in Jesus. Of course, I believe he was born of Mary. I believe he lived a perfect life. I believe he died an atoning death. I believe he was raised to remind us of his victory over death and in our forgiveness of sins. Do you believe in Jesus? But do you believe Jesus? I hope you see the difference. There is a difference between believing in Jesus and believing Jesus. As we come to our text for today, we find that Jesus has chosen a place for ministry. He has left the place near where John was doing his baptizing. John has been arrested. And he has gone to Galilee, which is sort of a semi-rural area. He has made his home base Capernaum, a city, a town. But he is an itinerant minister, going around all of Galilee, doing many things. We read sort of a brief synopsis of what he was doing. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. Of course, the synagogues was the place where teaching took place. It had been that way quite possibly since the Babylonian exile, some 500-600 years before this, when the people were taken off away from their homes and away from the temple, and they had to discover new ways of being religious, if you would. They could no longer go to the temple in Jerusalem, and they could no longer offer sacrifices there. And so what they started to do was gather in groups, much like we do today. And they formed these groups. And in those groups, they studied the Torah, which is the law. And so in this Babylonian captivity, what happened was there was a sort of a transition away from a religion of sacrifice to a religion of study. So much so that even after the exile is over, people still gathered in synagogues. Wherever there were 10 or more Jewish families in a city, wherever that city was, they would gather together and they would have a synagogue. And even today, in our time, if you go to Lynchburg or if you go to Roanoke, you will discover synagogues there. And so here's Jesus. He goes and he teaches in their synagogue. Their synagogue. It's not unusual, as a matter of fact. Whenever a guest preacher shows up, you give the Andy Griffith show where the pastor from New York shows up, and so their pastor says he's going to preach for me this week, and he does. It was that way. You remember the story? Jesus goes to his hometown, back to his hometown. He sits down and they give him the scroll from Isaiah. He opens it up, he reads from it, and then he exposits from it. They don't like his preaching. I don't think Jesus cared at all. So anyway, he taught in the synagogues, but not the only place. Go forward, go into the 5th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. You find Jesus is out there. I don't know exactly where, but he's out there. And we're told he goes up on the mountain. and he begins to teach. You know what we call that? We call that the Sermon on the Mount. But if you go back and you think it's a sermon, you go back and you read it. It begins this way. And he began to teach them. There's a crowd of people. We understand why they're there. He was healing them, right? It reads this way. And they brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, who were suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. I wish we could do that right now. There's many right here, right now, who wish that somehow Jesus were here and he would heal them. I wish I could pronounce healing over people and they would be healed. Healed of those horrible diseases like cancer that take life from us. We understand why friends and family would bring these people to Jesus. It says they were suffering. They were experiencing severe pain. Later on in some of the Sunday school classes, they'll be studying the book of Job. And that's what Job's all about. It's about severe pain. If you read my Brady's Ballpoint, which is my newsletter, for those of you who know that we have a newsletter here, and I actually like to write a newsletter. My newsletter article this coming week will be about pain. Chronic pain. Have you ever had pain and you say, I wish you would go, I had a pain in the neck while I was growing up. No, it wasn't Ruth. I slept on my pillow wrong. The perfect pillow. I thought, and I wondered, what in the world, what is it like to live with pain all your life? We understand it. We understand people coming and wanting him to bring relief to them. Some people want to, even present Jesus this way to people. If you come to Jesus, everything in your life will be right. Not long ago, you know what happened? I'm not going to say who, and I'm not going to say when, I'm not going to say where, but a person came to me. He had an issue. I'm not going to say what that issue was, but his primary thing was he didn't want me to give him help with the issue he had. He wanted me to heal his marriage. Heal my marriage. Our marriage is broken up. And I'm going to say, come to Jesus, and Jesus will heal your marriage. So many people want to be healed, and it's understandable. But it's interesting, if we read the summary and if we really look at it, we come to understand that Jesus did not come so much to heal. Yes, ultimately, finally, he heals us where we need healing most. But if you listen to it, it says he came preaching the good news of the kingdom, just like John had come preaching. And he also told people, repent, which simply means come to the place where you reorient your life. Where you reorient your life. Where suddenly God becomes what God was meant to be from the very beginning. The story of the garden. And the fellowship that Adam and Eve had with this God who walked with them in the cool of the day. No, what Jesus did was he came to teach. We know this because by now he has called 4 disciples. They were fishermen, and he called 4 disciples, and they're following him. You don't call disciples unless you're going to be a teacher. As a matter of fact, that's what teachers did. They had their own disciples. The prophet Isaiah, he had disciples. The prophets themselves, they had disciples. And so Jesus teaches them, but he doesn't just teach them. He teaches the crowds who would come to him for healing. Have you ever been asked to teach? It's one of the scariest things that you'll ever be asked to do. Have you ever, when the first time I was asked to teach, it was 5th grade. It was 5th grade. And Miss Bradley came to me and she said, Brady, Johnny's having trouble with spelling, and you spell well. See, that rhymes. You spell well. And I want you to help him with his spelling. And so I helped Johnny with his spelling. And he took the next spelling test, and he got a B, and I don't know who was smiling more, Johnny or me. There's something about teaching when you see the success of the student. I learned something then about the joys of teaching. Jesus is a teacher first and foremost. In the Sermon on the Mount, it begins, and he began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And so on and so on and so on. Blessed, 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 blessed. If you came here today, I can well imagine that you want to be blessed. We call these blessings the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes. Maybe later today you'll be out there somewhere and you'll encounter someone, and after you're through talking with them, you say, well, you have a blessed day. Has anybody ever said that to you? Well, you have a blessed day. What does having a blessed day mean to you? What does it mean? We want everybody to have a blessed day. As a matter of fact, as we go through the Beatitudes, we wish Jesus would just stop there. Jesus, that's enough for us. Just tell us how to be blessed. That's all I want. All I want to know is how to be blessed. And I wish Jesus would stop there. But he continues, even in that Sermon on the Mount. Later on he says, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Now imagine that you're still in school. I don't know, 5th grade, maybe 12. Maybe you're in college, you come into the classroom, and you see this written up on the blackboard or on the dry erase board, or maybe it's superimposed up there by computer, the way people do now. I wish I could do that, but I'm technically challenged, technologically challenged. But you're seeing that, and you're reading that, and everything else. And he says, write that down, or type that in your notebook, or whatever you want to do. That's the teaching for today, and so you do. And you have it in your notebook, or you have it in your personal computer. And later on, you're leaving. Maybe the class took place here. And afterwards, you're walking down the street, and you decide to have a Coca-Cola. So you stop into B&B, and you go in there to get your Coca-Cola. And you're feeling really great because you've got your notebook with all the teaching underneath your arm. And you're walking around like this because you say, oh, I've got that notebook, all that teaching there. And suddenly you come back from the freezer getting your Coca-Cola, and there standing in front of you in line is this person. It's the very person who's been going throughout the community telling lies about you, telling stories about you, being dishonest about you, and you end up standing right behind that person in line. And you want to give that person a swift kick in the leg. Let's be honest, you do. We get angry. This morning when my wife and I were driving here for worship, 2 cars passed. I was going 60 down 29, the speed limit. And 2 cars passed us as we were going down there. And we noticed something. One of them was tailgating the other one. And so the other one moved over in the other lane, in the right lane, which the other person could have done who was behind all the while, but they didn't. And they pulled up and they continued to tailgate. You know what that told me? Road rage was happening. And so as I'm driving, Bruce praying. I would have prayed too, but I like to keep my eyes open while I'm driving. So you're standing behind that person in line and you want to give them a swift kick. And suddenly you feel your you remember what you have underneath your arm. It's a challenge. And I want to ask you something. Jesus gives us these difficult teachings. Love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Do you think when he says that you're... And do you think when Do you think Jesus believes if you do that, you'll be blessed? Just blessed for doing it. In that moment, you're more like Jesus than you can well imagine. Jesus up on the cross. Rachel said it before. Jesus died for our sins, right? He bled for our transgression. He was wounded for our iniquities. Intention, we tear off the bread, we dip it in the wine, or we're Baptists, grape juice, and we eat it. This is my body broken for you. This is my blood shed for the remission of your sins. And we remember that wonderful scene on the cross. These people, Jesus naked, that's the way he was crucified, naked. They were casting lots for his clothes. Jesus on the cross looks down and says, Father, forgive them. Love your enemy. Are we blessed for following? You know what? I have... Jesus teaches with authority. You read that in other places. As a matter of fact, they said he was different from the other scribes. He taught as one who had authority. And do you know what that is? Do you know where you find Jesus' authority? Jesus says, you know, you've heard it said, you have heard it said, but I tell you. There are people who tell me that they're trying to read through the Bible, but they always get to that begat section. You know the begat. So-and-so begat this person, so-and-so begat. And they say, I get stuck in the begats, Brady. I can't get past the begats. Can you help me get past the begats? And I say, sure. Can you help me get through? But I tell you. But I tell you. You see, that's where I get stuck. That's where I get stuck. I had a teacher in high school. He ruined in one year my handwriting. Had great handwriting until Mr. Poindexter got a hold of it. We called him Mr. P. Mr. P was actually shorter than I am. He was skinny. Mr. P taught me, he coached tennis. He actually played Arthur Ashe. Mr. P, at the beginning of the year, had a comb, like, you know, and then by about halfway through the year, he had a full-blown afro, about the size of a basketball. He was so skinny, and he looked like a pencil with one of those huge erasers on him. You walked in Mr. P's biology class, and when you looked up, the whole blackboard was covered with notes. And you sat down and you started taking notes. You started taking notes. And then you know what? He would erase the board about halfway through, and he'd put up another, you know, after he figured you were through with this part of the notes, he'd erase that part, and he'd start writing some more. And so you spent the whole time, my fingers would get, I'm not going to say which finger, it would get a blister on it from writing so much. And then the day of the test would come. And he would hand out the test. And we were trying to recall all the notes Mr. P had given to us. And when he looked at us, and he could see that look in our eyes as we were reading the test, and he would say, "You look stupefied." What he meant by saying you look stupefied, he meant to say you are struggling with that material. And we did. We truly struggled with that material. And I think that's what the Bible does to us today. When it says, you know, Jesus is teaching us. And we say we believe in Jesus, but do we believe Jesus? Do we believe what Jesus is teaching us is the best teaching we can have? Do we believe that what Jesus teaches us really is the teaching we are to embrace, the teaching that is to guide our life, that is to help transform our lives? Several years ago, a man named Larry Alex Totten was interviewing young people who had left the church. Many of them had become atheists. And he was interviewing a college student whose name was Phil. And Phil told him church had become a mushy mix of ceremony, hand-holding and kumbaya. I miss my old youth pastor. He actually knew the Bible. And what Totten goes on to write is, the church does not exist simply to address social ills, but to proclaim the teaching of its founder, Jesus Christ, and their relevance for the world. In other other words, as you go through the New Testament, especially the Gospels, what you're coming across is mostly Jesus' teaching material. Down in our basement, of our home, there's an old kitchen table. Some of you know the type of table, the ones with the red tops and the silver. Remember those? Some of you remember those. You're as old as me. Some of you are. It belonged to my mom and daddy. Red top, silver, silver legs. And you would think we'd leave it, but that thing is stacked high with, guess what? Teaching material. Belongs to my wife Ruth, who some of you know teaches. And it's what she has collected all through the years. And sometimes I wonder, boy, can you imagine all those suits? This past Tuesday, I was at the DMV because I had to get my license redone, and I decided to get one of those identity ones. Some of you know the identity. And you have to bring everything to let them know you were you. Did you know that? You're supposed to bring to them something that has a Social Security number on it. You're supposed to bring them 2 utility bills, and you're supposed to bring them all this and all that, So you present you, and you say, I'm me. And so I did that. I was in the DMV, and I came up there. A real nice young lady was waiting on me. And she's going through this, and she said, can you verify, and everything. And she's looking at all this, and finally this young lady, after I'm signing my name, she says, are you Mrs. Willis' husband? See, you catch that? You see how funny that is? For 2 reasons. Now think about this. To that young lady, how many Mrs. Willis's are there? Do you think I knew who she was talking about? So I said, yes, I am. Not knowing what was going to come next. And she looked at me and she said, I had her at Alta Middle High. And I loved her classes. Now, some of you might disagree with that, but this young lady said she did. And she said, I could always tell she wanted her students to do well. So I said, can you tell me what your last name was? Can you spell it for me? Because I want to go home and tell my wife that. Because sometimes the teacher needs to know she's made a difference in the life of a student. Right? Some of you teachers know that. You need to know that from time to time. I made a difference in the life of a student. So I went home and I told Ruth of my encounter. And it pleased her that her student remembered her class in this way. I asked Ruth, was it reading or history? Because Ruth used to teach some history. She said, I think it was history. I wonder if she remembers the material. I wonder if she remembered that 6th grade history class, whatever you study in 6th grade history. There were crowds of people who came to Jesus to be healed, to have their lives made right. But first and foremost, Jesus sees himself as a teacher. And we have just read some of this material today. What does that make us? Are we glad? Are we glad that we have him as our teacher? Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we pray that you would guide us even as we open your word and study it, Lord, as we seek to apply it to our lives, because the lessons are important even more than what we learn in other places. Help us to learn them and to live them well. We offer this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. And so we're going to offer an invitation to you today. Maybe you both believe in Jesus and believe Jesus. And Jesus says this: if you're burdened, if you're heavy laden, come to me, and I will lift that burden. He says, come to me, and I may not take away all of your problems and your sickness and your sorrows, but I will help you bear it. Come to me, and I will never forsake or leave. That's his promise. That's what he says. So come. Josh is going to be up here at the front, and we await your arrival.